Could anyone in the lightweight division beat Charles Oliveira? Charles is coming off an extremely impressive first round submission over Justin Gaethje, and now Oliveira is the #1 contender after he missed weight by only half a pound. Now, whatever you think of Charles missing weight, whether you think it's unprofessional or whether you don't really care, everybody would have to agree that their performance was extremely impressive. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA. I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. Charles Oliveira is just amazing. The level of versatility that he has within his stand-up ability, his ground game, the level of heart that he has, determination in order to win. Basically everything about Charles is at a very elite level at this point, which is especially impressive considering where he was at the beginning of his career. And although he made a huge mistake missing weight, I think we all know at this point that the champion has a name, and his name is Charles Oliveira. Now, after that win over Gaethje, there's a few different questions that pop up for Charles. The first and most obvious is who's next. So there's a bunch of names that are being floated out there, but I think three names with the most validity to them are Islam Makhachev, Justin Gaethje, and Conor McGregor. Now, starting with Islam Makhachev's case, it seems like the UFC wants to put the fight back together of Islam versus Beneil Dariush, but the big question about that is, would that fight be put back together before Charles fights again? Because if it does, then the winner of that could just face Charles for the title, but if it doesn't happen before Charles fights next, it's most likely Charles is going to fight someone else. But at the same time, Dana has hinted that he would like to see Charles fight Islam, so of course that still is a potential matchup. Now, moving on to Justin Gaethje, I don't personally think this fight is going to happen, and I also don't think it makes all that much sense, but the only reason why I put him on this list is because after Charles missed weight, a lot of people were calling for an instant rematch for Gaethje, even if Gaethje lost his fight. And the reason being is people thought it was completely unfair to Gaethje. Now, I personally don't think it was really all that unfair to Gaethje, because obviously if he won the fight against Charles, he would currently be champion. And in my opinion, it affected Charles a lot more than it did Gaethje. I think that's pretty clear. So I don't really think the rematch makes all that much sense, and I don't personally think it's going to happen. Maybe if the first fight was a little bit closer, then maybe you can make a little bit of a better case. And I'm not necessarily saying that Charles completely ran through Gaethje, because obviously Gaethje had his moments early in the first round, but after those two knockdowns were over, which are obviously big moments, the fight was kind of over after that, and Charles certainly had an amazing performance in that fight. But now moving on to Conor McGregor, so obviously Conor isn't necessarily deserving of a title shot at this point, as he is on a losing streak, but of course at the same time he is Conor McGregor, and the rules are a little bit different for him compared to everybody else. But honestly, I think this matchup does make a lot of sense for all parties involved. It makes a lot of sense for Charles because it's a huge payday for him, and it's also a matchup that's probably a little bit easier to win compared to some of the other guys in the division. It makes a lot of sense for Conor because of course he's getting a title shot, and Charles is very hittable, so if Conor could connect with that left hand, who knows, he could potentially knock Oliveira out and be the next champion. And it makes a lot of sense for the UFC because it's another huge money fight that they could put on. Whoever Conor fights in general is always a huge money fight, but just imagine if the UFC can get Conor back to that title shot, just imagine how big that fight would be. And of course, Oliveira did call out Conor after his win, and Conor did respond, and it seemed like he was interested in that fight. So although a lot of people may not like it, I think this is a real possibility. Now, out of those matchups that I mentioned, I think Conor is clearly the easiest. If the fight is standing, I think Conor certainly has an opportunity, although Charles is phenomenal on the feet and has a very diverse skill set. But if Charles ever wants to take the fight to the ground, or if he ever decides to jump on Conor's back, I think the fight is basically over at that point, similar to what I said going into the Justin Gaethje fight. But of course, at the same time, you can't necessarily completely count Conor out. There's always that opportunity that Conor lands with that left hand, and if he lands clean enough, of course he has the capability to completely knock out Charles. But one thing that I do want to say is Charles basically gets knocked down a couple times in every single fight, so even if Conor's able to knock him down, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to win the fight, obviously. The real key for Conor is he would need to completely knock out Charles. Now, moving on to Justin Gaethje, I think a rematch would look pretty similar to their first fight, in the sense that Charles would probably end up finding a submission. Now, one thing that I will say is Gaethje did look a little nervous and was certainly overextending after he saw his lower leg kicks were not working or weren't all that effective due to Charles constantly checking them. And in a rematch, he probably wouldn't panic as much as he did in the first fight after those leg kicks weren't working. But at the same time, I think the fight would end up going to the ground at some point, or Charles would just hop on his back at some point and probably end it just like he did in the first fight in a submission. But now moving on to the Islam Makhachev fight, I think this is a very, very interesting matchup. Now on the feet, I certainly would give the edge to Charles Oliveira, but at the same time, Makhachev is extremely underrated and is a lot better than most people give him credit for on his feet. But the real interesting part about this fight is once it gets to the ground, who would be better? Because obviously Makhachev takes everybody down, and once he does, he's able to pull submissions, he's able to just maul you as well. And the question would be whether Islam would be able to take Charles down, and if he does take him down, which he probably would be able to, would he be able to maul him similar to what he does to everybody else, or would Charles be able to pull a submission from his back, or would Charles just be able to stand up altogether? Now, if I had to personally guess at this point, I think Charles would have the slight edge in that fight, although of course I think it's an extremely close fight, solely due to the fact that I don't think Charles would get mauled on the ground. I think he's just too good on the ground for that to happen, and if the fight were to be on the feet, I certainly think Charles has a relatively big advantage in that sense. But of course, there's a possibility that Islam is able to take down Charles pretty easily, and once he has him on the ground, Charles wouldn't be able to get up, and he would just be getting mauled at that point. I just don't personally think it's all that likely, but of course it is a possibility. Now, this isn't necessarily a fight that would happen next, but one other matchup that I just want to touch upon is Michael Chandler. Now, although Charles did defeat Michael Chandler by a second round KO, I still do think Michael Chandler is a relatively difficult matchup for Charles, and the reason being is on the feet, of course he isn't all that technical, but Michael Chandler is extremely powerful and clearly has the capability to knock out Charles Oliveira. But probably the biggest reason why I think he's a difficult matchup for Charles is once the fight does get to the ground, Michael has proven the ability to stop Charles' submission game, even when Charles had his back, which most people don't get out of that position. And I think due to that fact, if Michael Chandler was able to knock down Charles Oliveira, he would be a lot more likely to jump on Charles and try to get the finish than some of the other fighters that I mentioned in this video, because he's proven the ability to stop Charles' submission game, which not a lot of people could do. So answering the question of the video on whether somebody else in the lightweight division could beat Charles Oliveira, I think everybody in the UFC is beatable on any given night due to the level of talent at the top end of these divisions. But at the same time, I think Charles Oliveira is the champion of the division, and I think Charles is the best in the lightweight division. And I kind of just get the vibes that he's going to be a dominant champion for years to come. And of course, everybody that I mentioned in this video, I think Charles would have the edge over. But we'll see what happens going forward. We'll see who Charles' next opponent is, and then we'll take a deeper dive on that fight. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Charles Oliveira is beatable by anyone in this division, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now. And until the next time, peace out, guys.